Welcome back to another episode of the Grow RDH podcast. If you are a new listener, I would like to just introduce myself. My name is Katie. I'm a dental hygienist from South Dakota, and I like to just talk about things that are important and on my mind and things that are sort of trending. If you are a repeat listener, I appreciate you coming back, and I'm excited to continue our conversation on motivational interviewing. Last week, we started to introduce motivational interviewing as a patient communication and a behavior change technique that is really patient-centered. And so last week, we talked about the spirit of MI, or the theory behind why MI is so important. I highly recommend you go back and listen to that episode before this episode, but they're not a pair. Excuse me. These episodes aren't a pair though, so if you want to take off by listening to this episode, that's fine too. Today we're going to be talking about the history of motivational interviewing, the scientists that started the theory and the research behind it, and some good resources that you can use to start to investigate using MI in your practice. So yeah, it's interesting because I think MI really addresses a lot of the pressure points in dental hygiene education. And I think that's why it's so helpful. And I think that's why the people that really employ it and do it well are so geared up for it, because I think you're going to feel a lot more satisfaction in your patient relationships based on using this theory, and it really does improve relationships overall. So I'm excited to talk about the history. First, we're going to talk about a clinical psychologist by the name of Dr. William Miller. So Dr. Miller was the first scientist, and he was a clinical psychologist, so he used this in his practice, and his reasoning by kind of highlighting some of the foundational concepts of MI was because when he was working with his patients, he worked with a lot of people that had alcohol addiction and alcoholism. And the frustrations that he was seeing was he would talk to patients about interventions they could do, and he would educate them, and he would feel so frustrated when the patients would relapse, or when the things that they were saying and the actions that they were doing were not in harmony. And a lot of the times when that ended badly, or instead of encouraging and empower them, his patients got really resistant and almost became defensive, because they felt sort of attacked, or I don't know what a good word is, but they felt very resistant to the things that he was trying to get them to do or change. So he started a new technique, or a new approach to how he worked with his patients. And that approach was putting the power in the patient's hands. He started to ask more open-ended questions. He started to engage and ask the patients specifically what they wanted for themselves, what outcomes were acceptable or desirable for the patient, not necessarily what he thought as a clinical psychologist would be best for them. And what that did was opened up a whole different realm of what it means to be in relationship with a patient. He noticed that his patients became more open to change. They became more open to talking about specific reasons why they couldn't change. And they felt heard. They felt supported. And he felt the difference. And so the first research article that was actually published in MI was in 1983. And he outlined some of the steps he was taking and the different principles that he based MI on. And it was a really effective way for other clinical psychologists to follow his path. In the early 90s, then, MI was really gaining traction. And especially in the realm of addiction, that's the field that it really flourished, and they saw a lot of really good change. And another clinical psychologist, Dr. Stephen Rolnick, started to also employ the methods that Dr. Miller was publishing. And where he really saw the difference was in smoking cessation and getting positive healthcare outcomes from smoking cessation. So he was employing these tactics, and he found that this method could really be used in healthcare. He was kind of the ones to really recognize the connection and start to value how well these outcomes could translate to improving overall health just by making small behavioral changes individually in the patient's life. So Dr. Rolnick took hold of it and started to employ this in healthcare, and the results were great. They found really, really good positive results in the field specifically of diabetes and hypertension management. So very relatable and very attributable to a lot of the different healthcare outcomes that we deal with all the time in the dental field. And so if you think about this in your practice, in your daily practice, think about how many times you have talked to patients about the link between periodontal diseases and whatever healthcare things they're struggling with. Specifically, let's use diabetes as an example, because I already brought up diabetes. So specifically, diabetic patients continue to come in with more inflammation. And we know that has to do with the chronic low-grade inflammation that they have in their bodies, the chronic pro-inflammatory mediators that are floating around, all of those systemic inflammatory issues that have the same risk factors as perio. All of them are the same. And so if we go backwards and sort of address the problem at its root and talk to patients about overall health and overall outcomes that they want, more than likely those outcomes are going to be beneficial across the board, because changes that they're making in the positive that can improve their periodontal state, their state of inflammation, will also improve things that affect them systemically, like hypertension or diabetes. So it's really interesting how Dr. Rolnick really put those pieces together and was able to see the benefit and see the use of how this can be translated into the overall broad healthcare profession. So Dr. Miller saw all the benefits in alcohol addiction, and Dr. Rolnick connected the dots between addiction. He was working in addiction as well, but behavior change and positive healthcare outcomes. And together they brought their brilliant brains together and wrote a book. And that book is called Motivational Interviewing, Helping People Change. So if you are starting out just learning about motivational interviewing in general, I highly recommend checking that book out. Rent it from the library, get it on Audible. Start there, because that has all of the theory and the foundation and the philosophy behind why this works. And it goes way greater into detail than I would have time for on a short podcast episode. But I highly recommend that book. I've referenced that book many times in our school, working with students and trying to teach them not only the how, yes, how is important, but the why in motivational interviewing is really the essential piece that separates motivational interviewing out from the trans-theoretical stages of change. And that model is great for action. I'm not discounting that method or modality of behavior change, but motivational interviewing, when it comes to the root of the problem, I strongly believe is a lot more getting to the root of the why. And the why is really, really the important part, right? So they wrote a book, Motivational Interviewing. And if you fast forward now to the 2000s, so we're going to the 2000s, this field was blowing up. There was so many different applications of MI, not just in addictions, but in healthcare. Yes, it is very effective for addiction treatment, but across all healthcare fields, it has been shown, proven time and time again. And I will link some great articles for you to start with in the description of this podcast. But over time, research in healthcare has shown that it greatly reduces patient resistance and it increases long-term care outcomes. So if you think, again, going back to the root of the problem, this method is not just going to give you a short-term outcome. It's not just going to make the patient all of a sudden think flossing is great or think fluoride isn't toxic. This is long-term. This comes to the heart and soul of what it means to build a relationship with a patient. And when you get to that root of it, you're not going to see as much resistance. You're going to see a lot of the barriers come down or the walls come down. So that way communication can flow in a more patient-centered way. And that's truly the goal of this. The goal is to make sure that the patient feels supported, but if you did listen to the first episode, it is a lot about autonomy as well. And so when you're looking at long-term outcomes, the more autonomy the patient has at the beginning, the more empowered and self-confident they're going to feel long-term. So we know periodontitis is a chronic disease. That means if they can make some really effective and self-guided change, that is going to be more sustainable. We want sustainable change. And the patient is going to be the only one that knows if a change is sustainable or not. So when you give that patient autonomy and they're able to make those decisions, it is more sustainable long term because they know, and one, they know they can do it. They know they can make that change. And two, that change is building on more positive change that can come down the road. So it was implemented in healthcare, and the patients, again, did not feel, the research showed that the patients did not feel like they were being lectured at. They felt in control, and they were less likely to shut down when it came to taking advice from healthcare providers. You have to build the foundation before you can give the meal, right? And so we want them at the table. If they're not coming to the table with an open mind and with a willingness to listen, then they're not going to want to eat what's at our table. So we have to build the foundation first, and we have to bring them to the table. And a lot of the times when they're feeling heard, when they're feeling like the input and the expertise that they have in their own life is being valued and being taken into consideration, they are way more likely to contribute. And we need their contribution. We need their commitment or their, taking tasks on. We need them to internalize the importance of what we're doing and the importance of what they're doing at home. So if we can do that and adopt it just like they've done in addictions fields and healthcare fields, if we can do that in our own practice and for our own patients, I think what you're going to find is that one, you're going to have a lot of patient satisfaction, and two, you are going to be more satisfied When you employ these techniques, you are going to be more satisfied because you are going to feel like the conversations that your patients are having with you are more robust, they're more meaningful, and the results that you're going to see are going to be a lot more actionable than us just educating. We might have 5 minutes at the end of the appointment. We're just going to preach to you for 5 minutes about how important it is to use your water pick, and then we're just going to let you go. Then in 3 to 6 months, when we see you back, we may or may not have used the water pick. And if that was a decision that the patient didn't really think was relevant, or didn't think that that was something that they could employ, that patient is already set up for failure. So when you come back and you're like, hey, did you use the water pick I talked to you about for 5 minutes last time? And they'll just be like, yeah, I tried it, didn't work. Or, yeah, I tried it and just shut down. Or, yeah, no. Right? So if the patient makes the decision to use the water pick and the patient has successful results or unsuccessful results, that is not on you as a provider. It's on you and them as a collaborative team trying to make a decision. So having more meaningful conversations is really the root of this, and putting the patient in the steering wheel, in the driver's seat, really allows you to have better results. So that is the history of MI. That's where it came from. If you have experienced MI, I would love to highlight some success stories. So share with me, what do you love most about MI? How do you successfully use it? Do your patients feel more heard? Do they feel more valued? If you haven't used MI, again, I would love to hear from you. Just the same, I would love to know, where are your pressure points? Are you feeling frustrated? And what tactics from MI that I've talked about do you think that you could employ in your daily practice? Because it's so easy. It feels kind of awkward at first. And it's really important, I think, to maybe practice or do some role play. But what pain points do you have? How do you think that this might fit into your practice? So thank you so much for listening. When we come back next Friday, we're going to have 4 specific techniques that you're going to be able to try in your practice. Those techniques are going to be open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. And we're going to go into all of those 4 steps and why they're important. And then hopefully next week you will have some actual tools that you can try in your practice and see how it feels, or see how your patients react. So I'm excited for you to try it out. And in the meantime, have a great week, and I will see you Friday. Don't forget, if you value this content, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this information with a fellow dental hygienist. I appreciate all your time listening to me and supporting me. So thank you so much, and we will see you Friday.